Hello, church family. I hope and trust you are well. Now, yesterday at 4 o'clock, it was announced that from the 4th of July, churches and other places of worship are able to reopen for the function of gathered worship. Now, obviously, that will be with restrictions in place, but that was the news that was announced. Now, that would have caused, I'm sure, a huge number of emotions in people. Some of you may be feeling elated and excited and swinging from the rafters at the prospects of being able to gather together in worship. Others of you may be feeling a little bit more confused with big questions in your mind about why it is that we're able to gather in worship, but you're still not able to hug members of your family. Others of you may be feeling fearful or anxious or worried about the prospect of maybe a second wave, and maybe things are moving too quickly. You might be feeling angry about that. Maybe you're feeling a little bit jealous. Maybe you know you're going to be shielding for a little while longer, and the thought of some people being able to gather for worship when you can't is filling you with a little bit of jealousy. Maybe you just don't know what you're feeling. You're feeling indifferent, you're feeling uncertain, you're feeling unsure, maybe you're not feeling anything. I don't really know. But all of those feelings and emotions are valid. And I think I've experienced a number of them since 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. But this video is important because we want to make you aware of a few different things. The first is to say that the announcement is about a guideline, not about a must be. It's not that all churches have to start gathering from the 4th of July. It's a choice given to each individual parish and benefice based on whether they think it's safe, it's right, it's the best thing to do in their context. Now, I want to say at this stage that we won't be gathering for worship on the 5th of July as soon as that, because if we are going to gather again, we need a little bit longer to plan and prepare and put things in place for that to happen. But also we need to ask the question whether it is the right thing for us to do right now, and that's the purpose of this video. As I've been praying about this and thinking about this since yesterday afternoon, trying to work out, God, what's the right thing to do here? What should we be doing? And then changing that prayer to, actually, Jesus, what do you want us to do here? It's not about right or wrong, because we don't know what right and wrong is, because we've never been here before. This is new territory for all of us. So the question is, Jesus, what is it you are calling us to do in this season? And the overwhelming phrase I got last night was to ask his people to speak to you guys and say, is this a time that we could be seeking God in a way like never before about the future of his church and how he wants us to respond at this time? And so that's what we're asking you to do over this next few days, to find that deepest part of you that connects with God and connects with the deepest part of God, and to begin to ask those questions. God, what are you saying to me in this time? And I do want you to do it on that personal level rather than thinking about the big picture of the whole church, because that is a massive picture and we don't know necessarily what God is doing behind the scenes. But what we want to be able to do is take what we're feeling, thinking, knowing that we're body, mind and spirit, and holding our thoughts and our emotions, but along with being led by the Spirit into the things that Jesus has for us and how we are to respond. Now, in order to be able to do that in an informed way, I think it's important that we are aware of the realities of what it would be like if we were to gather back in worship. And some of these things you may be fully aware of, and some of these things you may not have considered at all. It depends how much detail you've looked into the guidelines that are in place. But here is a brief rundown of what it might look like once we gather together for worship, if we were to do it in the near future. Firstly, numbers will have to be limited. Because we would have to adhere to social distancing, we cannot fill our buildings with all the people that would normally gather for worship. I've looked at both in St. Mark's and in St. Mary's, tried to work out what those numbers might look like based on both whether we stay at 2 metre distance or whether we go down to 1 metre distance. And at St. Mark's, it's estimated that the maximum capacity would be between 15 and 20 people. and at St Mary's it would be between 40 and 60 people. Now, because we would have to limit numbers, we would have to work out how would we go about doing that. Would it be a case of having somebody on the door, turning away people once we get to that maximum number? Or will it be that we have to ticket church and people have to pre-book to come to a service? Both of those are options that are before us, but numbers will have to be limited. Now, as well as numbers being limited, we won't be able to sing in the way that we normally would. Singing has been prohibited. It's thought to be a common and a likely way to spread the virus. And so they're asking that when we gather for worship, the same is true of weddings and funerals as well, that we don't sing when we gather. Now that means that the services that we offer would have to be a spoken prayer book service, like a morning or evening prayer, but without the books, because we won't be able to have books either. So everything will have to be done on a screen or based on memory or call and response or something like that. So the type of services will look very different without singing and without certain things that we would normally have. We also wouldn't be able to share in communion for a while longer. We don't know when that will be relaxed, but I would imagine it will be some time before we're able to share in communion again as well. Now, as well as that, we won't be able to hold our kids groups as we normally would, and so families will have a difficult decision to make. Do they bring their children to the service, knowing that the service will be different to what their children might be used to, or do they choose to stay at home and engage in other things? On that note, we will also be expected to and will need to continue our online engagement as well for the sake of those people who wouldn't be able to gather. Now that would mean we would be preparing and resourcing 2 services each week. There would be the YouTube service, which will no longer be able to be live if we're meeting at Sunday morning in the church. And so all of that will have to be pre-recorded and pre-arranged. And then obviously preparing the service for being in church as well, if that's what we feel is the right thing to do. We obviously wouldn't be able to share in tea and coffee after the service. And then at the same time, the toilets as well at St Mary's would have to remain closed, so it might not be as comfortable as it would normally be. We would obviously be a lot more spread out. Now, all of those sound like negative things. I just want to make you aware of the reality. That's not to discourage us away from saying, let's not meet together, but that's just to be aware of the reality of the situation. Now, obviously, on the flip side of that, the good thing is that people who are feeling lonely or desperate for connection may be able to find it in the church if we were to meet together again. Now, they are the situations that we would find ourselves in if we were to gather in worship. Now, I want to be extremely honest with you for a moment and say right now, I don't feel like it's right for us to go back at this stage. It doesn't quite sit easy with me. But what I'm trying to do in my prayer life over the past 24 hours is to seek God and say, God, but what is it that you want? That prayer of Gethsemane, not my will, but yours. I want to recognize that my emotions, my thoughts, my feelings, they matter. They are important to God. And I can take those to God. But at the same time, I want to be seeking the will of the Father, as Jesus did in Gethsemane. And so I'm asking that question, Jesus, what is it you want us to do? Because ultimately, if Jesus says we wait, then we wait. If Jesus says we gather, we gather. If Jesus says do something else, we do something else, because this is ultimately his church. And whilst what we think and what we say and what we feel does matter to him, and it matters to each of us, at the same time, we want to be seeking his will for the future of the church, because we are in a place we've never been before. Now, that means that when we hear from you about what God is saying, we don't want to hear what you think is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do necessarily. We want to hear what God is saying to you about those things. Why is it that you feel it's important we do gather? Or why is it you feel it's important we don't gather, depending on which side of the fence you sit on? And then what is God saying about that feeling? What is God saying about those things? Now, as well as thinking about what God is saying, we also want to make sure that we're thinking about our whole community as well in the decision that we make, and that we're not just thinking about ourselves or what we want or what we think is right or what we think we need. We want to be thinking of the whole community, our brothers and sisters in Christ who will be in a variety of different positions. One example of this is that those who are shielding have been told in the past few hours that they wouldn't be allowed to gather for worship until at least the 1st of August at the very earliest. And so that's one group of people to consider and to bear in mind when we're thinking about whether or not we would like to gather back together in church. So, what we're asking you to do is to spend the next few days really seeking God about this. Taking to God those emotions and feelings and thoughts that you have about whether you think we should or shouldn't gather. Asking God whether those feelings and those emotions are right, with an open heart and an open mind to what he may say to you. And then to let us know what God is saying to you personally in this situation. And we hope that then that collective, as we gather those things together, that we may see that God is saying similar things to all of us, or to many of us, we hope. And then we will wrestle with those and sit with those and work through those and pray through those and seek God through those as well, as to what his desire is for his church in this unknown season. Now, as I said, we don't know what right and wrong looks like. So it's not about making a right decision or a wrong decision. It's about seeking the heart of the Father for his church and what he wants us to do. So I pray God's rich blessing on you as you seek him about this over the next few days. I look forward to hearing what he says to you and how he reveals to you what it is he wants us to be doing. And grace and peace to you as you seek him, as you seek after him in this particular season. And thank you for your support and understanding and prayers during this season.